Okay, so welcome to today's Scope webinar feature. We will be enjoying a talk today about Canada's National Forest Inventory and Yukon collaboration. We are hosting this talk with respect and gratitude on the traditional territory of Tonquachon Council and Kwamandun First Nation. My name is Monique Chatterton, and I am the Science Policy Advisor. So I work with the Office of the Science Advisor for the Yukon government with Sabrina Kinsella, who is here as well, and she is the Acting Science Advisor. So I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers for today. There she is. So we have Byron Smiley and Brandon Drost. So Byron Smiley earned his bachelor's and master's degree in geography from the University of Victoria. He focused on landscape scale forest carbon budget analysis. Soon after that, Byron joined the carbon accounting team at the Pacific Forestry Centre, Canadian Forest Service. And in 2018, he joined the National Forest Inventory team. Brandon Drost is a longtime Northerner living in the Yukon and Northwest Territories for most of his life. He completed the Renewable Resources Management Program at Yukon University and began work as a forest technician with a focus on silviculture and inventory. While working at Yukon's Forest Management Branch, he completed a Bachelor of Science in Environmental and Conservation Sciences, majoring in Northern Systems through University of Alberta. Currently, Brandon is the Inventory Forester for Yukon government and coordinates the implementation of the National Forest Inventory Program in Yukon, as well as other local inventory and mapping projects. So I will turn the floor over to Byron and Brandon to give their presentation. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone, and we'll just get the presentation loaded for you. So Byron, you should be able to share that. Okay, that looks great.
Thanks, Monique. Are you able to see it?
Yep, see it well. Thank you.
Fantastic. So yes, thank you for having me today. Brandon and I are going to tag team this presentation, which is it's representative of how the National Forest Inventory works. We partner and work very collaboratively with our provincial and territorial partners to deliver the National Forest Inventory. I am situated in Victoria, BC, on the traditional territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. As I said, I'm very pleased to be presenting on the National Forest Inventory and our collaborative work with Yukon. So I guess I really want to start at the beginning and describe what is the National Forest Inventory and what it is we do. We have reporting obligations, and I'd like to describe what those are. And then the data we collect to support those reporting obligations. So we have our core data collection programs, our photo plot and ground plot programs that collect data across Canada. And over the last 5 years, we've been working with the provinces and territories to harmonize various other pan-Canadian forest data sets. And I'll give a brief description of those. And really, this data is publicly funded. It's available to anybody who wants to use it. So I'll go into some of the projects and how people are able to access these data. And along the way, we'll also go into some specifics, Brandon more so, of how we're collecting data on the forests in the Yukon. So in Canada, the management of Canada's forest resources, like other natural resources, falls to the provinces and territories. So why do we have a National Forest Inventory at the federal level? And really, it comes down to our responsibility as a country to report internationally on the state of Canada's forests. So as I noted, we partner with the provinces and territories to collect forest data and information. This data is fed through various federal programs and is compiled for reporting to various national and international bodies through the State of Canada's Forest Report, released annually, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the Montreal Process, the UN Food and Agricultural Organizations, Global Forest Resource Assessment, and many others. And these national level reporting mechanisms really are focused on describing Canada's environmental reputation, maintaining market access, and social license. So the NFI has been around for a while, but not as long as many other forest inventories in the world. Some of the Nordic countries have had inventories since the late 1800s. The NFI idea was established in the 90s, and our initial NFI data collection occurred between 2000 and 2006. Our first remeasurement period happened between 2007 and 2017, and just last summer we were able to publish and report data collected during that period. And we've been steadily collecting data ever since. Now, the reason partly that the NFI exists is that we've got a different scope of data collection that we have to report on versus what the provinces and territories report on. So really, what is a forest inventory? And a forest inventory is like any other inventory. If you think of a warehouse inventory, we need to have an idea of what do we have, how much do we have, what's the value, what's the volume, and we need to know where it is. And that's basically what we do with our forest inventories, is we collect information on the ground from aircraft and from satellite to determine what's in the forests and, more importantly, how it might be changing. Provincial forest inventories really focus in on their managed forests. So what areas are allocated to provincial needs, whether it's wood volume or other values, such as parks. The NFI's responsibility is for all forests, so forests outside of those managed areas. And we're looking at a sample-based program, which is really at the strategic level. So we do strategic level assessments, whereas provincial forest inventories are really focused on the management side. Another
jump in there.
Yeah.
Really quick fire, and like, what really drives our inventories here is the local and regional planning for our forest resource management plans, and then reporting on those plans. So that's what really drives our inventory here, and it's like you said, it's forward looking instead of backwards.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. That's a good distinction as well. Is the NFI is really looking at trends through time. So it's looking at change that we've observed through the past. And provincial forest inventories are more forward looking at how we might, what types of values or volume we will see in the future. So these are the two, core data collection programs that Canada relies on to report on the state of Canada's forests and how it's changing. We have a relatively sparse network of National Forest Inventory ground plots that we remeasure on a 10-year cycle. These have very detailed measurements of everything from the trees to the woody debris on the ground, to the needles on the forest floor, to the soil carbon that we measure from soil pit measurements. We also have the photoplot program, which is really our main data source for reporting nationally on forest attributes. So I'll go into some details of that later, but just to also note that there are other sources of information that we use nationally, including the National Forestry Database, which tracks forest management activity and disturbances. And all of the jurisdictions in Canada are active contributors to these programs. So the photo plot program is really that. We take imagery, whether it's from aerial photography or very high resolution satellite imagery, and we interpret the forest and land cover within a 2 by 2 kilometer plot. And these samples are located on a 20-kilometer grid across Canada and a slightly less dense grid in northern Canada at the moment. And within these plots, we categorize land cover, disturbance, treatments, forest origin, species, and many other forest attributes. And as I noted in the previous slide, the ground plot program has much more detailed information, specific measurements that I think I'll let Brendan go into in more detail.
Sure. Yeah, the main point of the ground plot program is to really measure all those forest attributes that we can't do remotely. So things like soil measurements, biomass, woody debris, ground vegetation, all of those sorts of things. So we're trying to get an assessment of the total ecosystem carbon stocks, all the way from the top of the canopy down into the soil. So these plots typically take 3 qualified people at least 1 day to complete. And as you can see, there's quite a bit to them. There's multiple plots within the plot, transects, subplots. There's some minor destructive sampling, but most of it's just measuring the trees. But we do have to take some ground and soil samples as well. So if you don't mind going to the next slide there, Byron. So as you can see on the left, there was a little bit of a hole here in the Yukon. We have been lagging behind in getting the ground plots done. It's just been hard to do them up here with the remoteness of the plots. But in 2022, we started a project to start doing the ground plots in the Yukon. The Our Clean Futures funding is helping us out do that, as well as NFI folks. So these plots are located within the photo plots, and they're at a subset of the photo plots, about 10%. So we're planning on installing 70 of the plots in the Yukon. And as you can see on the map, last year, we got 11 of the 70 plots done in the green there. So these plots are revisited every 10 years, hopefully. And they're very detailed. I think that's the key thing, is they take a long time to do, but we get really good data and information out of it. Go ahead, Byron.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. We are very excited to be partnering with the Yukon to establish NFI ground plots. It's something that, like Brandon mentioned, a bit of a gap that we had in our measurement activities for many years, but we've managed to overcome that through our partnership this past year. On the destructive sampling piece, I'll just note a couple things that we bring back some samples for lab analysis and archiving. We collect tree cores at a subset of trees within the plot that are processed and scanned at our Northern Forestry Center in Edmonton, and those core samples are archived there. And we also collect clip plot information and forest floor samples that are collected and analyzed for various nutrients and archived at our Pacific Forestry Center here in Victoria. So as I mentioned, for the past 5 years, we've been working closely with our provincial and territorial partners to collect or harmonize existing forest sample and forest resource inventory data that we know have been collected. So most jurisdictions, as in the case in Yukon, have their own permanent sample plot program, or forest resource inventory, so spatial polygonal forest inventory programs. And when a researcher comes along and wants to do an analysis with these data, and that analysis or study area spans multiple jurisdictions, they have to sign agreements with those jurisdictions, determine how the data were collected, and harmonize those data to a common standard before any analysis can be conducted. And what we wanted to do was get all of that work done ahead of time, have it analysis ready so that researchers or analysts could come along and take that data and be ready to go. So that's what we've been doing with these a few programs here. I'll pass it back to you, Brandon.
Yeah, sorry, mic issue there. Yeah, so as Byron said, we're working with the NFI group to kind of harmonize our data into a common standard across Canada. One of those data pieces is our permanent sample plot program. And this program began just before 1990, and it's about 250 permanent sample plots located throughout Yukon. And the purpose of these plots are definitely different from the NFI ground plots. These plots to provide growth and mortality information on the forests, and they're done in less detail, but they're done on a higher frequency. So they're done every 5 years instead of every 10 years. And the hope is that it'll be a long-term data set that can provide effective management for our forest resources and being able to track changes over time and then predict future growth and yield that can be used in our inventories. So yes, like you can see on the slide here, they are not spread out throughout all of Yukon. They are in locations that we can hopefully get to more often and easier. And yeah, just a little bit less information. So if you don't mind going to the next slide there, Byron. So really, we want to have these PSBs located in as many forest types as possible in different geographic positions to kind of capture the whole realm of Yukon forests. And we want to be able to track them from establishment to reestablishment. So from the beginning of a fire all the way to when the forest is in its final state. So the plots are based on forest composition, age, variety, and a whole bunch of other factors, and we try and select them to cover all of those different types. So this information, hopefully, in the next year or so, will be more accessible to people and available. And I'll let you go to the next slide there, Byron, and kind of introduce that program.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, the PSP program that Brandon just describes, they exist in every jurisdiction across Canada. So one of our harmonization projects is to take this for a sample plot information and harmonize it to a common standard to make it more available to those folks that want to use it. So our goal is by this coming March to have these data available to folks to request and download. And right now we have over 44,000 individual plots within what we call the multi-agency ground plot database. And this tracks trees through times. It has site information, disturbance information, tree condition information. So this is one of the programs that we feel like, especially if you want to track growth and mortality or project growth and mortality for a species across the entire Canadian land base, a database like this is going to be invaluable. Similarly, we've been developing the common attribute schema for forest resource inventory, and this is an analogous type effort and database, but for spatial polygonal forest resource inventory, taking these FRI data sets from across Canada, harmonizing them to a common standard so that they can be made available to folks that want to use them. And we, in both cases, these two projects, we hope to have available come March, and then as users use them and experiment with them, we're hoping to get feedback on what ways we can look to improve it, whether that's by adding additional data sets, new remeasurement information, or new attributes to these data. The third data harmonization effort we call the Disturbance Data Foundation. And we know that there's a plethora of disturbance information in Canada that's either collected through satellite information or aerial surveys. And it's all collected for different purposes, for different reasons. And a lot of times you can have, say, one fire event that's been mapped by multiple different agencies for different purposes, and they obviously have different end information. So we wanted to bring all this information together to harmonize it, to explain why some of these differences exist, but also to make it a one-stop shop for disturbance data in Canada. So this data is actually available. There's a story map on the National Forest Information System website that explains some of these differences. But yeah, another useful data set and tool. And really the overarching goal behind these, a lot of the work the National Forest Information System does, and especially with these data harmonization products, is to follow the FAIR principles of data accessibility. So to make sure that any product that you developed, whether it's a data or publication, is findable, it's accessible to users, it's interoperable with other processes and data, and it's reusable. And in our default is to try and be as open as possible, but there are certain cases where we need to restrict data where there's private information involved. So on the NFI website, we have a data request form, and people are able to go and request NFI ground plot data and photo plot data now. And these data are used for a variety of different studies and purposes. As previously mentioned, for growth and yield, for carbon analysis, to determine climate change impacts. There's many uses that have, over the course of the NFI's history, these data have already been leveraged for. One new program that we're very excited about is called the Forest Mapping for Wildfire Resilience Program. It's a 5-year program that was announced by the federal government in 2021. So we're in year 2 of that program. And the goal of this program is to improve the mapping of forest fuels with a specific focus in northern, remote, and rural communities. So in a lot of southern areas, there's good forest resource inventories collected by jurisdictions that they use to determine what the forest fuels are that can lead to wildfire behavior. But in the north, in many cases, we don't have that kind of detailed information. So this effort is really focused on improving the data and mapping we have in northern Canada so that information can feed into wildfire behavior models to determine risk risk to communities. So I've kind of laid out a fair amount of information here about the National Forest Inventory, how we collect data to a common standard through our ground plot and photo plot programs. And we're not just focused on areas that are managed for wood volume. We look at northern forests or all the forests in Canada. And our primary responsibility is for national and international reporting on the state of Canada's forests. We also have these various forest data harmonization efforts that will hopefully be leveraged by the research community to inform future work and future understanding of Canada's forests. Brandon, do you want to provide some context in a summary capacity?
No, I think you did great. Yeah, just that Yeah, it's a great collaboration that we have with the NFI team. And we really do hope that our data that we collect here in the Yukon can be used with other data for the public and researchers to be able to produce products.
Great. Thank you very much. And Monique, I think I will pass it back to you.
Okay, yeah, thanks so much, Brandon and Byron. That's really interesting to learn more about the National Forest Inventory and how it's being implemented in the Yukon. So I would like to open up the floor for any questions. So you can put your hand up using the reaction button down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also just raise your hand physically if you have your video on, or you can write it in the chat. Okay, I see we have a question. So that is from, I think it's, so it's, the screen says R and Annette. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, Brandon, Brian. Kind of an anecdotal parallel to this inventory. It's a bit like doing a stock taking exercise in a warehouse, but to get a meaningful picture of how climate change is happening, or how climate changing is helping forest insects and other things change the forest or affect the forest, as in the spread of beetle kill up here, for instance. It would be necessary to do a stock take, as it were, on regular intervals to get some sort of a time element into the data set. Have you got any plans for that?
Yeah.
I can speak locally real quick. So locally, we do have a forest health program. If you're talking about pests and that sort of thing, it's side by side with the inventory, I would say, and that surveys the forest on a rotational basis every 4 or 5 years. Basically, the whole of Yukon gets surveyed for that, and then. Yeah, as in regards to the inventory, we would love to get there eventually, but I think, yeah, I don't think we can see surveying the whole forest in that detail. Yeah, at the moment, but Byron, I think at a higher level potentially.
Yeah, so on the NFI side, the NFI is a monitoring program. So whether it's the ground plot program or the photo plots, the plan and the expectation is that we revisit each plot once per decade. So that's true with the ground plots. So plots that we're establishing in Yukon now, we would expect to revisit in 10 years time. So plots that we established in Northwest Territories have been measured, have been established and have just completed their first remeasurement, and now they're looking at going into a second remeasurement. On the photo plot side, it's the same thing. So we capture within those measurement periods. So photo plot information that was captured between 2000 and 2006, we've gone back to those plots, re-imaged them, reinterpreted the forest information, and then that data gets fed into our estimation routine.
In that 10-year interval, is that a logistical come financial limitation, given that the last 10 years have been the warmest on record and forest fires are going crazy? And is that sensory period too long to be able to react in good time, as it were, to change of circumstances?
Yeah, fair point. The 10-year cycle, I guess it's a combination of things. When the NFI was established, many jurisdictions, that's how often they renewed their inventories. So we synchronized with them to a degree. There is obviously logistical and financial considerations. Some of these plots, as Brandon noted, are because they're on a systematic grid, Many can be extremely remote. Many in the Yukon are heli access only. And even then that's heli access to a clearing, and then you got to hike in.
Yeah.
It does provide us with a degree of understanding of change, but you're right, with the speed at which some forests are changing due to climate change, it is challenging.
Well, certainly up here, they reckon we're going to get a 6-degree temperature change if that hasn't already happened. Byron and Brandon will probably know more about temperature changes in the forests around the Yukon and possible spread of pests better than anybody else.
Yeah, that's another piece where we're hoping our forest mapping program comes in, where some mechanisms we're able to capture data more regularly. The Landsat time series record is a huge source of information from the remote sensing perspective, and capturing some of those large scale disturbances, but on the ground measurements more rapidly, like as Brandon also noted, the PSP program is on a 5-year remeasurement cycle.
Yeah, thanks guys, good talk.
Yeah, sorry I dropped off there. I don't know if there's other questions towards me, but I lost my internet for a minute. So
I think there's a couple in the chat that you might be better equipped to answer.
Yeah, we could, I think, do we want to go to Forrest and then go to the chat? I think Forrest had their hand up for a while. Does that sound okay? Okay. Forrest, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. How does this data, this national data, tie to, or does it tie to the National Inventory Report on greenhouse gas sinks and sources?
Yeah, good question. So we, to some degree, that team is the team that builds the forest sector component of the NIR is at the Pacific Forestry Center. So we work, we have colleagues that we work closely with, but the data sets are shared in that the data coming from the provinces and territories are inputs to both programs in many ways. So because our data are really focused on the forest attribute information and not so much the greenhouse gas reporting or accounting side of it, we're more, our data gets circulated through the State of Canada's Forest Report and not tied in with Environment and Climate Change Canada's National Inventory Report.
But I would think that the work you're doing with your plots with, soil carbon and all that, those, above and below ground quantities would be super important for that inventory. So if the two are sort of running in parallel and not actually, if they're two separate independent data sets and running in parallel, it sort of seems not the most effective way.
Yeah, so you're right. The data we collect, especially with the soil information, is actually used by the carbon accounting team when they test and adjust their carbon budget model. So that's how they parameterize the carbon budget model. They look at the stocks that we see from our soil sampling. Even though like I said, our sample is quite sparse, it is in some of these areas the best source of forest below ground forest carbon. So those data are leveraged within the carbon budget model, as is a lot of the biomass proportion information. So you would get like a volume, a merchantable volume from a forest inventory, but you don't know the breakdown of how much carbon is in the stem, is in the foliage, is in the branches, and to some degree our data is leveraged for that purpose as well.
Could kind of sort of be used to calibrate it or
exactly
inputs to it. Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks for that question, Forrest. I see we have some questions in the chat. So these questions are from Emily. I can read them out for you, Brendan and Byron. So first question, are any plots established on First Nations land? If so, how has the process been for installing those plots?
So in regards to the permanent sample plots, yes, they have been definitely within many First Nations traditional territory, and some are on First Nations settlement lands. And the process for them has been collaboratively working with each individual First Nation to actually install and monitor those plots. For the NFI plots, currently none have been installed on any settlement lands, but if we do look or do want to do that, then obviously it'll be, again, in collaboration with the individual First Nation governments. And yeah, they'll be fully involved. Does that kind of answer that question, or is there something specific you're wondering?
Nope, that's perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I was just curious if it had been a smooth road or not.
Yeah, I think for us anyway, we have them and us go out to the plots together. We work on them together and do them as a team. So I think it's gone well.
Okay, thanks for answering that question. There's a second question here in the chat from Emily. So the second question is about growth versus removals. Will the data from these plots help address whether or not there is enough standing timber to support additional removals, for example, firewood production, or is that information already known?
I can speak for the PSP data. It'll definitely go into our calculations for determining things like annual available cut and timber supply on the landscape. So yes, it will be. There's a lot more that goes into that as well. Yeah, Byron, do you have anything to add to that?
I would say it's, as that's a jurisdictional question of management, I'll leave it mostly to you, but I will say in other jurisdictions, others leverage the NFI ground plot data and merge it with their own sampling programs to, I mean, it's one more sample, and if the data can be used for the purpose of determining that growth versus removals question, then it's made available. The data are co-owned by the NFI and the jurisdiction. So I don't know specifically if it could be used for that purpose, but it is available to be utilized in sync with provincial PSP programs.
Yeah, it would definitely be used if it was in the right location for the timber supply area we were doing an analysis on. We would use it for that analysis.
We have another question in the chat. I don't see any other hands up, so I'll go right to that chat. So Brandon, would drones be of any use in the survey, or is satellite surveying sufficient? And so that's sort of a two-part question, I think. And then is any AI being introduced to try to predict what is happening and how it can be projected with a view to targeting fire risk or logging areas?
Yeah, there's a lot to that. Yes, drones. So for forest inventory, we have used drones for more of the local, more information is needed, kind of an enhanced inventory of a local area. For the kind of broad inventory at a higher level, it's usually air photos or satellite information. Is that what you're asking about, like the regular inventory, or are you talking specifically about the ground plots?
It's kind of an intermediary to ground plots, which are highly localized, and satellite, which is on a 2 kilometer grid or is it 2 kilometer grid on a 40 kilometer sampling, which is kind of huge.
Yeah, for sure. I guess, and to answer your second question, locally here, we're starting to use that with the drone data. And I know there are people working on it. We locally haven't implemented that yet. Byron, do you have anything to add on that?
Oh yeah, there's certainly folks in CFS at different centers that are utilizing drones, mostly in our research capacity at the moment, to see how they can be used for forest information assessment. Operationally, I don't know how widely they're being used for these types of things, but multi-scale data collection is certainly something that has to be leveraged, and I think we are, in that the NFI photo plots themselves are on the 20 kilometer grid. They're a 1% sample of Canada's land base, but if you look at and they're based off of high res information, in many cases 50 centimeter resolution imagery or less, but they're only collected once every decade. Whereas you have 30-meter resolution Landsat data that are collected on a very regular basis, and mosaics exist on an annual basis. So there's two high-level scales that I think in one way or another that information can be fused to provide a better picture. And that's certainly something we're looking at with the forest mapping for wildfire resilience program. Yes, people are using or utilizing or experimenting with AI for forest inventory as well. I don't have any really good details on that right now, though.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that question. I think someone else may have had their hand up. Bob, did you have your hand up? Did you have a question? I think I may have missed that
Yes.
before. Okay.
Yes, I'm intrigued a bit by the forest mapping for wildlife resilience program, and whether that's strictly federal government territorial, or whether people like renewable resource councils or First Nations or communities or people working on fire smart programs might be able to access that somehow.
My understanding is that, as with many of our other data sets, the mapping output from that program will be open data, and it'll be operationally produced, which means it'll be updated on a regular basis. The output is likely going to be like many of the other products I've spoken about. It's fusing some of our other information data sets, the NFI ground plots with the NFI photo plots, and utilizing Landsat data. So it'll be at 30-meter resolution. But yeah, it depends on what your needs are, if it would suit them or not.
Okay, so the outputs may or may not be, or would be available, but I'm wondering about, but it seems to be using only existing data. There's no sort of call for research areas or identifying priorities. Is that correct?
It really does have an operational focus, in that we know this is a vital need for remote communities, with places like Lytton being decimated by wildfire. We want to make sure we had a better product out that could inform fuel mapping as quickly as possible. That said, there is a field sampling component to that program, and part of the program provides money to the Canadian Interagency Wildfire Center. I don't think I have that acronym correct, but that's part of the program. Also, part of the program is to support the next generation fuel attributes that our wildfire behavior models will need. there's a CFS publication on the next gen system that I think was released last year or the year before. And that's really the research side, the science needs that we're going to be starting to go after with this program.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that question. Any other questions? Okay. I think that looks like it's it. So I'd like to say a big thank you to Brennan and Byron for your time today, for sharing all of that useful information with us. It's much appreciated. We will make a recording of this talk available and share it in the Scopy newsletter and the Facebook page. There's another talk next Thursday and Thursday after that. So thanks so much, everyone, for participating. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the questions.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Mm,
Bye now.
thanks.
Bye.